In this video, you're going to be installing and setting up Babel locally. That's going to allow you to write JSX in your editor. It'll automatically get compiled down to react.createElement method calls, and then we'll be able to view the output instantly. So as we change our JSX, we'll be able to see those changes. We're not going to have to do any manual copying and pasting like we had to do in the last video just to get this very simple example up and running. That also means we're not going to have any code like this inside of our project. This sort of code is going to be compiled. So we'll be maintaining this code, and this code will be the code that actually runs behind the scenes. Now, it's important to note that Babel on its own, it actually has no functionality. Babel is a compiler, but it's not going to compile anything by default. We have to add various plugins and presets in order to get any sort of change in our code. For example, in order to take JSX and convert it into createElement calls. Now, there are actually presets running on this page. By default, Babel shows us what our code would look like if we used the ES 2015 preset and the React preset. Now, a preset is just a group of plugins, and we're going to explore all of that in just a second. For now, all we need to know is that if we remove React right here, we're going to get an error. Babel is trying to look at this code, it is not recognizing it, and it actually is crashing. When we include React, everything works as expected. So what we need to do is include the React preset locally when we use Babel, and that's going to take our JSX and it is going to convert it over into createElement calls that browsers actually understand. Now, we can learn more about all of this stuff over on the Docs plugins page. The Docs plugins page includes various presets and plugins that are available to you, things you do not need to do anything with except install. So down below, we have the official presets. We're going to be using two. First up, React. That's what's going to allow us to use JSX inside of our code. And if we click the React preset, we can view all of the plugins that are part of it. Now, we're never going to install individual plugins because it gets pretty out of hand pretty quick. Instead, we're going to use these presets, and the presets are going to have everything we need. Here, we have all of the plugins we need to actually convert that JSX. Now, if we go back real quick, we're also going to be using the env preset, which includes these three guys right here. This is going to give us access to all of those ES6 and ES7 features that we've come to know and love. So when we include the env preset, we're going to get things like const, we're going to get things like arrow functions, we're going to get things like the rest and spread operators, all of which we'll be covering later in the course. So all we're going to do is install three things. We're going to install Babel itself. We're going to install the env preset, and we're going to install the React preset. That'll give us all of the functionality we need for now. We're going to do all of that inside of the terminal by running a couple of long commands. Over here, we can go ahead and shut down the live server. I'm going to use Control-C to do that, clear the terminal output, and now we're going to install those three things. First up, we're going to install a global dependency using yarn global add. We'll talk about local dependencies in a little bit. And this one is called Babel-CLI. This gives us access to a command line interface to use the Babel compiler, but it does not come with any of those features. For example, ES6, ES7, or JSX support. So we're going to install this, and we're going to install a specific version that is at 6.24.1. And if you've taken any of my courses before, you know I always use specific versions, so the code you're running is the same as the code I'm running. This is Andrew from the future. Once again, if the global installation command failed when using yarn 2 videos ago, it's going to fail again, so you'll just use the npm install command here. That is npm install with the G flag to install it globally. Still the same module, Babel-CLI at 6.24.1. You can go ahead and run that command, and that is the last global installation we'll be doing in the course, so there's no need to worry about these update videos from here on out. Go ahead and run this, and then you should be able to continue on with the rest of the video. If you run into any issues at all, just open up a question in the Q&A, and I'll get back to you right away. I'm going to go ahead and install Babel-CLI, and that's going to give us access to a new command. This one is called Babel. We can run Babel -help this should print out a ton of output like you're seeing here. And if you are seeing this, that means Babel was successfully installed. If you're seeing an error like Babel command not found, that means something went wrong. Feel free to reach out in the Q&A. But if you are seeing this, step 1 has been successfully completed. Let's go ahead and clear the output. And now we're going to install those presets, React and env. These two dependencies are going to be installed locally in our project. So these presets, they don't give us access to any command like React or env. Instead, we just need their code to live in our project so Babel CLI can take advantage of it and actually use it to transform our JSX into those create element calls. First up, we're going to use yarn init. Yarn init sets up our project to use yarn. That's going to allow us to specify those local dependencies. If you've used npm before, yarn init is exactly the same as npm. It's going to walk us through a series of questions. It's going to ask for information like an app name. It's going to provide a potential default in parentheses, although you could always override that by writing your own. I'm going to leave it as the default, which is just grabbing from the folder name. I'm going to hit enter and move on to the next one, which is the version. We can use the default 1.0.0. We can leave the description empty. We don't actually need any of these values for our project. Same thing is true with entry point. No need to customize that. We're not going to be using it, and we're not going to be setting up any sort of repository system just yet, although later we will look at how we can integrate our React projects with GitHub. Down below, we have author. If we want to, we could type something in like Andrew Mead or your name, but it's by no means required. And finally, the license. When we get to the end, all this does is it generates a brand new file in our project. And we can check that out by going over to project in Visual Studio Code. Right here, we have a brand new package.json file. We could have created this file and typed things out like this. The yarn init command just makes it a little easier to get set up. And you see all the key value pairs we just specified over inside of the command line. Now, the whole point of package.json for our purposes is to outline all of the dependencies that our project needs in order to run. That's going to make it really easy to install everything. Now we're going to go ahead and specify our very first dependencies by running yarn add from the command line, but this time we're going to leave off that global keyword. I'm going to clear the terminal output, and right here we're going to use yarn add. Now we want to install those two presets we talked about. Let's grab the React one first. That name is Babel preset React, and we're going to lock in a specific version that is at 6.24.1, and this is going to allow us to install that dependency. Now we could go ahead and run this and then run yarn add again for the other preset, but we can actually just chain them together with a space right here. The next one is Babel preset -env, and the latest version for that one at the time of this filming is 1.5.2. Now we can go ahead and actually install both of these dependencies, and what's happening now is very different from what happens when we install a global yarn dependency. If we head over to our project, we're going to see that a few things changed. First up, inside of package.json, we have a brand new dependencies section, which outlines the dependency name followed by the version we want to use. And this is really important. That's going to allow us to reinstall all of our app's dependencies with just this little bit of information. Now we also have, obviously, a ton of other things going on. What we have is a bunch of sub-dependencies being installed. So we installed Babel preset env and Babel preset React, but they have their own dependencies. They have their own package.json file. They have their own modules they need. All of that, these two and their sub-dependencies, they all live in node modules. If you open this up, there is just a ton of folders inside of here. You do not need to worry about any of the code in any of these folders. We're never going to go in there and change any of that. This is a generated folder that we're going to be able to delete and reinstall based off of just this information. Now we also have one more thing that happened when we ran that command. We have a yarn.lock file. Yarn lock is once again something we're not going to manually change, just like node modules, but it is worth cracking open. Now right up top, we can see this is an auto-generated file. Do not edit this file directly. And this just lists out all of those dependencies that we saw in node modules. It contains the specific version numbers that are used, and it also shows exactly where it got that package. And this is pretty useful for Yarn behind the scenes. It makes sure that the code we're downloading is actually what it's supposed to be, and that also prevents any sort of issues. If libraries break, we can make sure that we're always using the specific version we specified. This is going to allow us to always resolve the exact same dependencies, regardless of whether we're installing this locally, on production, on a different machine, or anywhere else. So once again, yarn lock, don't change it. It's going to change automatically as we install our dependencies. Now we can go ahead and shut that down, and we can actually use Babel. So the whole goal is to create a file that we change, and then we're going to have another file get generated with the compiled code. So we're going to do this by creating a new folder in the root of the project. This folder is going to be called source, and this is where we're going to type out all of the React that's going to make up the Indecision application. Right here, we're going to add a single file for the moment, app.js. So app.js in the source folder, that's going to contain our JSX. App.js in the scripts folder is going to be an auto-generated file that contains this stuff, as well as all of the other Babel transformations. So what I would like to do is take all of this code and cut it out of this file. This file is going to be useless for our purposes, and we're going to save it and paste it over here. Now we're going to remove that create element method call. We're going to uncomment our JSX code, and this is exactly what we're going to end up running. So real quickly, once again, this file is going to get compiled, saved here, and that is what our index.html file is actually going to use. We're never going to manually change app.js in the scripts folder. That's going to change for us when we run the command. Now we can actually go ahead and run our very first Babel command. First up, let's clear that terminal output. And right here, we're going to start off with Babel. Now we're going to be typing out quite a few arguments, so bear with me for the moment. Right here, we start off by specifying the path to our code, the code we want to compile. In this case, it lives in the source folder, and the file after the / is called app.js. Next up, we specify the output file. That's the one in the public scripts folder, and we have to use --out file in order to specify that. I'm going to set it equal to public /scripts /app.js. So by running this command, we're going to be overriding this file. That's why we're never actually going to change it, because those changes are just going to go away the next time we run Babel. Now from here, we do have to specify one more argument. This is the presets we want to use. Right here, --presets. Now presets is going to get set equal to a comma separated list of the presets we want to use, and we have two. First up, env, comma, second up, React. And that's it. This is all we need to do to take our JSX and all of our ES6 code and compile it down into something the browser understands. So let's go ahead and actually run this and see what happens. Right here, everything seemed to go well. There is no error output. And if I head over inside of Visual Studio Code, you can see that app.js in source didn't change at all. And that's expected. Running Babel is never going to change the code that we write. It is, however, going to change the code in app.js. Over here, you can see exactly what we might expect. We have the React create element call showing up instead of our JSX. And this is not because we had it before. We deleted this file and we saved it. All of this was generated because we ran that Babel command from the command line. Now we can actually rerun that previous command using the up arrow key, but we can tack on another argument, --watch. This is going to watch our source app.js file for changes and automatically create a new public scripts app.js file every time a change is detected. When we run this, we can now leave it running in the background. And as we go ahead and change app.js in the source folder, it'll change this file. So let's make a quick change. I'm going to change this text. Does this change? I'm going to save the file, head over to the scripts file in the public scripts folder, and right away you can see it's already there. So Babel saw that change. In the background, it reran and it regenerated this. Now we're going to leave this command running for the moment, and I'm going to open up a second terminal tab. You can also open up a second terminal window if you like, and we're going to go ahead and start up live server here. So I'm going to clear the output. And I'm already in the Indecision app folder. You should have also auto defaulted there. If you didn't, take a moment to change directories into it. And from here, we're just going to start up live server exactly as we did before. Live server, and we want to serve up the public folder. Now this is automatically going to open up our web app in the browser. And right here, did this change is showing up. We could also go over here and just refresh this tab. Instead of having 2 tabs open, we'll just keep this one open. And there we have it. We have our code compiled automatically by Babel, and everything is rendering to the browser as expected. Now that means if we head back into Visual Studio Code, we can actually start getting productive. We don't need to keep this file open, and we can start writing stuff over here. For example, I can change this to an H1 and add my app title, Indecision app, save the file, and in real time, that's going to show up in the browser. It shows up as an H1 tag, and it went through that entire process. So Babel saw the change. It compiled a new version of app.js in the scripts folder. We can see our changes are reflected right here. Then Live Server saw that this file changed, and it refreshed the browser, and all of that gives us a really nice workflow. Now this workflow required us to install some local dependencies, so I do want to make a quick note about the node modules folder. As I mentioned, this is a generated folder, and I'm actually not going to include it with any of the zip downloads, any of those lecture resources for the rest of the course. Node modules is going to look a little different depending on the specific NPM or Yarn version, and it's also going to look different depending on the operating system you're using, whether you're on Windows, Mac, or Linux. So it's important to always generate this on the machine you're running the project on. So if we delete this folder, which is exactly what you're going to see if you download one of the resources, we can always get it back by running a single command from the command line. It is going to go through package.json. It is going to reinstall all of these dependencies, and node modules will look exactly the same. So to reinstall things, we are going to run a command from the terminal. I'm going to switch back to that first tab and shut it down. And if I actually try to restart it, it's going to fail. Here it's seeing that we cannot find the env preset. That's because we deleted the node modules folder where that code lived. So let's go ahead and fix that by reinstalling all of the dependencies. I'm going to clear the output, and we're going to use yarn install. This is going to look through package.json and install all of the dependencies, recreating the node modules folder. Now we have our node modules folder back once again, and if we rerun that Babel command, cycling through our previous commands with the up key, then hitting enter, we're going to see that everything is once again working as expected. So if you do grab a lecture resource, make sure to run yarn install to regenerate node modules before you actually try to run the project. Now that we have an automated workflow all set up, it's time to dive deep into JSX. JSX is a real templating language. We can inject variables inside. We can add click events. We can do all sorts of awesome stuff. That's what we're going to dive into next. I'm very excited to get to it, so stay tuned. I'll see you next time.